What happens when the pinnacle of predatory perfection collides with the purest form of fragility? Born with a singular purpose, to dominate and consume, Meruem was the ultimate machine, a force of nature programmed to reshape the world in his image. However, fate wove an improbable tapestry. A unique encounter, with a figure seemingly insignificant in his implacable eyes, triggered an unprecedented existential crisis. A complex internal journey that would transcend the brutality of his creation and force him to confront the essence of his own existence. Prepare to dive into the depths of the psychology of a creature that, in seeking external conquest, found internal transformation, revealing the immeasurable power of affection and the intricate complexity of what it truly means to be human. Your perception of the duality of strength and sensitivity will never be the same. In a hidden corner of the world, where primordial savagery still dictated the law of survival, a new species emerged, conceived to redefine the top of the food chain. Meruem, the king of the chimera ants, was not merely an individual, he was the culmination of an evolutionary process focused on biological and intellectual perfection. His birth was a cataclysmic event, an eruption of power that promised to rewrite the planet's history. From the moment of his emergence from the cocoon, Meruem exuded an aura of unquestionable authority, a supreme predator born with a single purpose etched into his DNA, to conquer and to reign. The architecture of the chimera ant nest, a complex labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, functioned as a command and control center, where his royal guards operated with terrifying efficiency, meticulously setting the stage for their monarch's ascent. The very social structure of the hive, based on rigid hierarchy and unconditional loyalty, reinforced the idea that Meruem's existence was purely functional and utilitarian, geared towards relentless expansion and the subjugation of all that opposed his will. Every breath, every thought, was directed toward the fulfillment of his primary mission. From a psychological standpoint, Meruem represented the archetype of the pure, uninhibited ego, a manifestation of the relentless pursuit of self-affirmation and validation through domination. He knew no fear, no doubt, no hesitation, these emotions were considered flaws, irrelevant to his perfect nature. Every action was a calculated, logical step toward his undisputed primacy. However, even in the apparent linearity of his existence, there was an unforeseen variable, a detail that no one, not even the most astute of his subordinates, could anticipate. A small deviation in the grand plan. A seed of anomaly was about to germinate in the heart of the predator. The turning point in Meruem's relentless trajectory did not come in the form of a great battle or an epic clash of intellects, but rather from a fortuitous and, at first glance, irrelevant encounter. The figure who would destabilize the foundations of his existence was Komugi, a blind, physically frail young woman, who, in Meruem's logic of supremacy, should have been nothing more than a disposable piece. However, Komugi was the undefeated master of Gungi, a complex board game that Meruem, the being of superior intellect who had never known defeat in any sphere, was unable to beat. This unusual confrontation, repeated day after day, generated a seismic internal conflict. How could perfection, invincibility incarnate, be consistently challenged and surpassed by someone so seemingly devoid of physical power or status? Meruem began to experience a range of emotions previously unknown in his repertoire. Genuine frustration, followed by growing curiosity, and gradually, a strange kind of respect, almost an affection. His world, once governed by binary logics of strength and weakness, of domination and submission, began to destabilize. The primal instinct to eliminate what is useless was replaced by a growing desire to understand, protect, and, above all, continue the interaction. Modern psychology could analyze this transformation through attachment theory, where the formation of a bond, even if initially based on rivalry, can reconfigure priorities. Furthermore, the concept of cognitive dissonance is fundamental here. Meruem, accustomed to a worldview where his superiority was absolute, was confronted with a reality that viscerally challenged it. Komugi's unwavering persistence, her genius in Gungi, and her pure passion for the game forced Meruem to re-evaluate his own values and to see beyond his initial programming, understanding that there were forms of value that could not be measured in terms of power or physical conquest, but rather in resilience, intrinsic skill, and, above all, humanity. And it was there, on that Gungi board, that the first signs of the ruin of his old worldview began to emerge. Meruem's mind, once a sharp instrument for conquest and annihilation, began to reshape itself in ways that defied his own biology. The hours spent playing Gungi with Kamugi, observing her unwavering concentration and the beauty of her passion, revealed to him nuances of existence he had never considered. He began to demonstrate patience, an unthinkable trait for such an impulsive and driven being. His speech, once direct and authoritative, began to be punctuated by deep questions about the value of individual life, the complexity of coexistence, and the meaning of true greatness. Meruem was no longer just absorbing beings, he was absorbing experiences, processing information on a completely new level. This new way of thinking led him to a profound re-evaluation of his own identity. If he was the king, the supreme predator, the perfect creature, and Kamugi, in her physical fragility and apparent social insignificance, was capable of stirring such feelings and questions within him, what did that mean for his role in the world? Scientific analogies can be drawn with neuroplasticity, the incredible ability of the brain to adapt, form new neural connections, and reorganize its structures in response to new experiences. The interaction with Kamugi acted as a powerful stimulus, a kind of brain reboot that allowed the emergence of new perspectives and emotional circuits. He was no longer exclusively focused on his primary mission of domination. The idea that there were beings not purely for consumption or subjugation began to germinate in his mind, transforming from a seed into a lush tree. His curiosity expanded beyond military strategy and battle tactics, reaching the core of human nature and existence itself. Meruem began to ponder the intrinsic value of each being, the complexity of life, and what, in fact, constituted true strength. But, while his mind expanded into unknown realms, the original programming of his being, the true monster, still lay dormant, ready for one last, devastating awakening. The point of no return for Meruem did not manifest as an act of grandiose and cruel transgression, but rather as the overwhelming recognition of his own emotional vulnerability and the depth of his attachment. Upon realizing how intrinsically linked he had become to Kamugi, and how much her presence altered his most fundamental priorities and his sense of existential purpose, his original worldview completely collapsed. The idea of conquering the planet, of reducing humanity to mere exploitable resources, began to seem hollow, empty, and devoid of any meaning compared to the complexity, beauty, and depth he found in a simple board game with a blind, fragile human. He found himself trapped in an overwhelming moral and ethical dilemma. As king, his primary responsibility was to lead his species to supremacy, ensuring the survival and expansion of the chimera ants at all costs. But, as a being who now experienced affection, respect, and even a form of devotion, how could he justify the annihilation of that which he was learning to value and, in a way, to love? Meruem began to rationalize his existence not only in terms of brute power and territorial domination, but in terms of meaning, connection, and transcendent purpose. He asked himself, with a newfound intensity, what if true strength lay not in dominating, but in understanding, protecting, and coexisting? This Copernican shift forced him to confront the essence of his own nature. He was a predator, yes, but also an insatiable learner. He was a born conqueror, but also an unexpected protector. Bringing the viewer to the center of this dilemma is crucial, provoking reflection. What if the capacity to feel, to connect, and to love is, ultimately, an even greater and more transformative form of power than brute force and strategic intelligence? What kind of being would become one who, born for indiscriminate destruction, discovers the invaluable worth of nurturing and preserving, even at the cost of his own programming? The deep psychological analysis of Meruem reveals an intricate and fascinating dance between his predatory genetic programming and the unexpected emergence of a complex and multifaceted consciousness. His transformation was not an act of madness or aberration, on the contrary, it was guided by a cold and implacable logic that, paradoxically, now applied to his own existence. If the original goal of his species was improvement and evolution, what could be more perfecting than the ability to transcend primal instincts and evolve into a thinking being, capable of empathy, affection, and a deeper understanding of the world? We can delve deeper into this understanding by using studies on cognitive and emotional development in contexts of unusual stimuli to validate and contextualize his behavior. Meruem was undergoing a process of forced humanization, or, more precisely, sapientialization, where exposure to a non-threatening, yet profoundly significant stimulus, the figure of Komugi and the challenge of Gungi, reconfigured his most deeply ingrained priorities. The theory of mind, which describes an individual's ability to attribute mental states, beliefs, intentions, desires, knowledge, etc., to themselves and others, began to develop rapidly within him, allowing him to see Komugi no longer just as a tool or a curiosity, but as an individual with her own internal richness, with dreams, passions, and a singular identity. Comparisons can be drawn with other fictional characters who have undergone arcs of redemption or transformation, but Meruem's case is unique precisely because of his non-human origin. He is not a human being seeking redemption, he is a creature that, through interaction, transcends its own programmed nature. The brutal logic of his initial destruction was gradually replaced by an even more powerful logic, that of his own internal reconstruction. It was not insanity or deviation, it was, from an almost scientific point of view, a cold calculation of existential optimization, but a calculation that now included variables like affection and intrinsic value. What remains after Meruem's extraordinary and bittersweet journey is a powerful and unsettling reflection on the boundless capacity for transformation. His existence, which erupted as a harbinger of chaos and total annihilation, culminated in an unexpected and deeply moving example of evolution and transcendence. Meruem did not destroy the world in the way he was expected to, instead, he shaped the perception of those around him and, fundamentally, that of the viewers, about what it truly means to be. The consequences of his metamorphosis, both for himself and for his closest subordinates and, crucially, for Komugi, were profound, inescapable, and, in their essence, poetically tragic and beautiful. Meruem's story invites us to a complex philosophical and moral reflection. Who are we to judge the evolutionary trajectory of a being, even if its origin is terrifyingly predatory and its initial programming was for subjugation? The narrative forces us to contemplate that love, affection, genuine connection, and the pursuit of meaning can, in fact, be the most powerful forces of transformation in the entire universe, capable of redefining what seemed immutable and of infusing soul where before there was only instinct. Meruem, the king who, against all odds, learned to love, left a legacy that transcends the simple dichotomy of an antagonist. He became a paradigm of development, a myth in himself. He forces us to look inward, to question the most basic premises of our own humanity. If even the most fearsome of creatures, the pinnacle of brutality, can find a path to emotional complexity and empathy, what does that reveal about the latent potential within each of us? What lessons can we draw from his journey about the true strength of connection and the redemptive power of affection? We conclude not with an absolute end, but with the suggestion of a new cycle, of an echoing resonance. But perhaps, true strength does not reside in domination or destruction, but in the capacity to be touched, to connect deeply with another life, and, in turn, to touch and transform the world around you. And what if that touch, that capacity to love and be loved, is the true and eternal cycle of all existence? Meruem's saga, the king who transcended his crown, comes to an end, but his echo persists, a vivid reminder of the unexpected malleability of nature. He leaves us with the unsettling and powerful truth. Even in the most implacable of hearts, the seed of change can germinate, propelled by the most improbable of connections. The line separating the predator from the thinking being blurs, forcing us to question the rigidity of our own definitions of monster and human. Meruem challenges us to look inward, to the capacity for affection that resides within each of us, and to ponder, what would you choose to be, the purposeless conqueror, or the one who, by connecting, unveils the intrinsic value of every life in all its forms?